This is an RNZ podcast.
Kia ora and welcome to the Kim Hill Collection. Emma Espiner is the definition of a high achiever. A well-known columnist, political commentator, and in the throes of a successful high-level career as an executive recruiter, she made the decision in her 30s to drastically shift careers and retrain as a doctor. She's talking here in 2023 about her memoir. It's a great listen, this one. It's honest and revealing. Hope you enjoy it.
Emma Espiner, who whakapapas to Ngāti Tukorehe and Ngāti Porou, has written a memoir called There's a Cure for This. After a childhood she describes as being raised in a purple lesbian state house, there was social activism, motherhood, radical career change at the age of 30. That came before motherhood, actually, and now a surgical registrar at Middlemore Hospital. Dr. Emma Espiner is dedicated to improving Māori health outcomes. She's an award-winning columnist. You may already know her by her work, and also a podcast which was called Getting Better, a year in the life of a Māori medical student. She is appearing at the Auckland Writers' Festival on May the 19th, and she's with me now. Tēnā koe.
Morena, Kim.
You know, there was a novel about 20 years ago called I Don't Know How She Does It. I don't know whether you ever read it. It was by Alison Pearson. It was very funny, but also, you know, kind of tragic, and it was about the dilemma of working motherhood. But the heroine of that had nothing on you. Nothing. You decided to be a doctor when you were pregnant. Please tell me why.
Well, pregnancy, you know, it's a kind of madness.
Oh, does your head in, right? Yep, okay.
It does. I wasn't one of those women that loved being pregnant and just got sort of increasingly grumpy and decided that I hated my job. And, you know, so maybe it was just
what was
kind
your
of madness.
job?
And now I have to stick with it. It's too late to change again. So I was working in executive recruitment, and I loved the people that I worked with and had great bosses. But you know, it was appointing chief executives and kind of C-suite type people into jobs, and that was a lot of fun and good kind of networking and gossiping about what's happening in the business world. But it wasn't really soul food for me. I didn't really feel like I was helping anyone that needed to be helped.
Here is an excerpt from your book. It says, none of my friends dared to have an opinion to my face. I was earning $110,000 a year. We had just bought a house in Auckland. We were about to have a baby, and I was suggesting to my husband, Guy Espiner, that I spend 6 years not earning anything at all for a career gamble that showed absolutely zero chance of paying off. You'd make a great doctor, was all he said. Now, he deserves a great deal of credit for that, as do you.
Absolutely.
Although you were the crackers one and he was the saint.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, no. And, and I really do want to acknowledge him for that, because it's interesting when you make a really dramatic decision like that in your life. People come up and talk to you about it, but they're often talking about their own aspirations or what they wish they might have done or what have you. And so I had a few people who said, I would have loved to have gone to medical school, or have loved to have been a doctor, but, we couldn't do it financially, or we couldn't, didn't have the support or what have you. So, that was a really important part of why I was able to do this.
And then, with a young child, you were a medical student and a columnist and a TV commentator.
Yeah, I'm an active relaxer.
Do you ever relax?
No, look, my therapist is concerned about that. But it's everyone needs to have goals and things to work on. So that's mine. But I think in all seriousness, the job itself and training to be a doctor is so intense that for me, I felt like anything else that I did outside of work would need kind of a corresponding intensity. And so, developing that writing career, it's a kind of mixed up logic, but it did work for me.
So
it was an equal and opposite kind of intensity.
Yeah. So any kind of completely different thing was a break.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it needed to be something really demanding because, the job and the study is so all-consuming that it's very easy for that to completely become your life.
It's extraordinarily sort of precarious and tense. I know this because I'm watching Shortland Street at the moment. But
yes.
all the time you feel, you're not going to get through this bit and you're not going to get through that bit. And you say in the book that you decided to be a doctor, becoming vulnerable in the face of something you wanted but might not get. And that, coming from someone who knew exactly what they were doing, they were working a job, it wasn't exactly brain taxing, going into something that you could fail at radically and publicly was a very bold move, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I guess for me, I just thought, well, I've only got one life, and I would never forgive myself for not, for not being brave at that time. But it was terrifying, and I still remember sitting at, I was doing some part-time admin work for my mum, who worked for the Department of Conservation, when I was waiting for the acceptance letters to come in, or rejection letters, as it were. And I just remember that moment sitting at this computer and refreshing my university email login, and it was just, there were so many really scary, is this not going to happen moments, and they don't stop, which I think is the most devastating thing about it, is because you get into the job and then suddenly you decide to specialise, and then there's all these other ways that you could fail.
What will you end up doing? I mean, you're a surgical registrar at the moment. What will you be when you have finished with the process?
Well, back to that potential for failure. So I've got about 60 hoops to jump through before I can consider getting onto surgical training. So that's the next step. And then there's sort of 7 to 10 years more after this. And ideally I'd be a general surgeon, which is what I've always wanted to do.
Which is being able to operate on anything you want.
Well, I mean, there's an entire debate about what that actually means these days, but yeah, kind of. I've just come back from a surgical conference in Adelaide, so it's. I hope it came across in the book, but medicine there's somewhere for everyone in medicine, I've found, and whether that's if you don't like being around people, or you absolutely love it all the time, or you only like people when they're asleep, so you do anesthetics. Like there's a group of people for you, and surgery just always felt like my family in medicine.
Surgery felt like your family.
And it's quite work-life balance is one of these things that we're always kind of banging on about people achieving in medicine, but I think the nature of the job means that you do have to have kind of a family around you when you're there, because it's so intense and stressful, and the hours, I mean, you see them more than you see your family.
Yeah.
And so you do have to build those relationships.
I
do anyway. I mean,
does it need to be so inhumane, those hours, those incredibly dysfunctional shifts?
Yeah, it's really difficult because there is a point at which when you reduce the hours too much in the system that we have there, and you increase the number of handovers, so between different teams and different people coming in and out of shifts, that there's a risk to patient safety. So I do understand an element of that kind of rostering, because you do see it in the workplace. You have when you're having to hand over the care of a patient who's been really unwell, and 3 or 4 people have their hands on it, things get missed. And
I hadn't thought of it that way. I mean, I thought about the risk to patient safety of somebody who's absolutely exhausted.
Yes, yeah, and that's it too. It's that what the equivalent of being drunk after being working for however many hours. And I mean, we just this year actually, I was driving home with my friend Karis after doing the Saturday ward round. So you work during the week and you have all sorts of hours, and then often you have to come in and do an unpaid ward round on Saturday. And her and I were driving back, and a truck crashed into us out of nowhere and totaled my car. And it was just one of those moments, you're kind of being shunted down the motorway, thinking, we just looked at each other and we're like, this is great, like what else do we need?
This is great. But not your fault.
Not our fault, but it was one of those moments where I thought, because I had been, I think I'd done a long day the day before, and I was pretty tired, but it was completely not our fault. This guy, just kind of blindsided us. But
were you both all right?
Both all right, yes. The driver was more shaken than us, and my car was written off, but so that was sort of a helpful challenge. Character building. I did think, had I been more tired, or if it had been after a night shift, my responses might have been less quick and could have been more badly hurt.
You went to medical school to train to be not a doctor, but a Māori doctor. But as you said before, you are still part of a system which is racist. You went in as part of the Māori and Pacific admissions scheme, and you describe in your book in very strong words how racist people can be when they assume the special treatment that you got under that. So please explain the scheme to us.
Yeah, so Auckland and Otago universities have slightly different affirmative action or social justice interventions in this to try and improve the medical workforce, or at least approach proportionality, so that we have a workforce that serves the population. At Auckland, essentially you have to meet the same academic threshold. There's a baseline academic threshold, and then if you whakapapa Māori or Pacifica, then you go through a separate interview process, and have a kind of different. You still do the same interview process that you do for that the students going through other pathways do, but then you have another one, and then there are a certain number of spots available. Always important to point out that there are other pathways for the likes of graduate students from rural entry. So it's always the Māori and Pacific entry pathway that's singled out, but we have interventions for other underrepresented groups as well, that for some reason, it never comes up in the media.
So, on the other hand, every other year, there is, you say, a campaign to discredit that kind of social intervention, special treatment for Māori and Pacifica, or people who believe you got the questions in advance when the exams came around.
Yeah. And the reality is, it's so hard to, I explained the amount of years it would take me if I am successful in pursuing general surgery as a career. So that's, 10 to 14 years kind of from the start of medical school. And that you think about that lead-in time for trying to transform the workforce. It's an incredibly long amount of time, and really hard to shift the dial when we're currently, so 4% of doctors roughly are Māori at the moment. So we're not actually even sort of approaching where we need to be. I think at the moment we've got proportionality with the population in the medical school cohorts, but that will take a long time to fix.
You mentioned your experience with Kia ora Ngāti Wai, which sounds like a dream, really. For years and years, everybody's been talking about, in every sort of area of life, joining the dots. And nobody can find the dots, never mind join them. But in this, you've seen that happen, have you not?
Thank you for noticing that. That was what I really wanted to convey, and it's also this kind of my conflict around having Te Whatu Order and Te Aka Whai Order, the national health bodies, when we know that for Māori in particular, and probably Pākehā as well, actually, because a lot of these things cross over. But for Māori, it's those the deep connection to the community and that understanding and building interventions that are specific to location and whānau and hapori that really work. So it's kind of, while I think the potential for Te Aka Whai Ora is great and having that overarching Māori Health Authority, we really still need to find ways to maintain that the mana of people in their communities. And because that's been the whole issue, right, is that we haven't given people enough autonomy to design the interventions or even just give them the money to do what they know needs to be done. And so that was what Kia ora Ngāti Wai was so good for, because you can just see everything present. When someone turns up, whatever problem they bring, there's someone that's willing and empowered to help.
Can it only work in a relatively small community or a small population?
Yeah, but that's the point, I guess, really. So
right.
And that, I think, there are parts of Te Whatu Ora where you're talking about, localities and kind of things like that might be in the works, but it's just, really preserving and empowering those communities to do what needs to be done and giving them a role. And, there are things that will need to remain within national and kind of hospital jurisdiction, but, we shouldn't have to be finding hard to reach people all the time. That we know we should have these communities embedded within our, our governance structures, within our leadership, so that when it comes time to do, something like COVID vaccines, we don't have to scramble to find people. We already know them. We already have them in our, in our rohe.
This is how you describe Kia ora Ngāti Wai. The nurses, community health workers, smoking cessation coordinator, social worker, healthy homes coordinator, rheumatic fever prevention team, administrators, cardiac and cancer specialists all share in the collective work of improving the well-being of this community. This is Kamo in Whangare. Their mahi is a common sense solution, a tight canvas spread below the high wire of deprivation and need. I mean, it seems, your heart kind of thrills to that. Can it be replicated around the country?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of the interesting thing about it, because when you present something like that, you think, wow, that's really logical. And I had a meeting with a new surgeon at Middlemore recently, talking about some equity project that he wants to do, and he's come from the States, and it was really interesting getting his perspective on the barriers to equity in New Zealand. He was just sort of saying, this just seems really logical to put care where it's most needed. And it's always really refreshing to hear that, because you kind of think that these kind of attitudes are really hard to shift, or really difficult for people to understand. It's like, yes, absolutely, that's great. But what I would say about is it scalable, and can it be replicated elsewhere? The thing about Kia ora Ngāti Wai, at least when I was there, is that a significant proportion of administration time was spent on applying for contracts, applying for contract renewals, auditing data. And we know that Māori health organisations have a greater audit compliance burden than non-Māori. That's just, another part of the kind of system that we have designed. So, you think about that. So if your contracts are only a year in advance and you're having to, spend a ridiculous amount of time doing the paperwork for that, how are you then able to put in a strategy for 5, 10, 15, 20 years for the wellbeing of whānau? So that kind of, there are all these little bits in the system that are designed to prevent us from doing what we need to be able to do, and then also not even build in the sustainability for those interventions over the longer term, which is so counter to the way that Māori work. It's about, the next generation and actually being able to plan for that. But, we're limited to these kind of ridiculous structures.
Is the shortage of doctors in New Zealand that we're constantly lamenting, is it a consequence of people not wanting to be doctors, or are we limiting the numbers of people who can train to be doctors?
Yeah, so the medical student numbers, in the universities, they're capped, and they're capped by the ministry, or Te Whatu Ora now, I guess. So
why?
Yeah, that's probably above my pay grade in terms of the various political reasons why. I mean, there's people have put forward arguments about the pipeline. So there's, how many junior doctor positions you've got, and then how many specialist training positions you've got. But it does seem to be that kind of circular argument where you present these issues again and again, and then everyone just throws up their hands and goes, "Oh, too hard." We'll just leave it as it is. But there's some really concerning trends around workforce because not only do we have a population that's aging, the expectations of the specialist workforce in 10 to 15 years, particularly in surgery, around how many hours they work, for instance, quite different to the generation working at the moment. So you might have surgeons right now who are happy to do, 60 hours a week, but we're looking at people who are saying, actually, no, I don't want to do that. So not only do we need to train more specialists across all fields, we also need to account for the fact that the ones that we do train might not want to work themselves to death in the same way that the current ones do. So the workforce issue is massive.
Right. Somebody has texted to say, don't buy into the dehumanising nature of medical training. It doesn't have to be that way. Technology can help maintain patient safety and handovers. To think otherwise feeds into the myth of the doctor or surgeon as God, which is unhealthy for them and for patients. Do you think there's something in that? We suffer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And there were some really interesting talks this week, actually, at the conference about the role of AI and which parts of medicine and surgery AI will be able to take that kind of burden off. So, yeah, absolutely. I guess it's in the absence of an intervention right now that could fix those things. I think we do still need to have enough people around and limiting handovers and that sort of thing. But I definitely agree, playing into the idea that the doctor is God or the only person that can make those decisions is, pretty unhelpful.
And thus, I have no way of a graceful segue to your chapter entitled "Don't Plant a Fruit Tree Over Your Uterus." Please explain.
Well, there's a pretty difficult segue into that. So, I mean, there were just lots of strange coincidences when I was, retraining. And one of them was that, our family got diagnosed with Lynch syndrome or HNPCC, which is a inherited predisposition to bowel cancer, but also endometrial cancer.
Is it the same mutation for both?
So it's a syndrome. So it's a kind of a collection of mutations that occur together. And the variant that we had, there was an increased risk of endometrial cancer. So mum found out first, and then she had a hysterectomy, and then I thought, I might as well do that as well. That sounds, I don't mean to laugh. It's not a funny kind of thing to do, but you pick up in the book, my way of making decisions is kind of quite rapid and
Did you, how long did you think about that?
Well, it wasn't like, I'd only ever planned to have one child, and so that wasn't an issue. And again, the work-life planning thing came into it because I thought, well, when am I going to get a chance to have 6 weeks off for recovery? Which is what they said we would need.
Oh, good Lord.
I know, it's perverse. So that was all part of it. And then our whole family, we sort of have a very close but slightly mad family. And so we thought we'd just, all bury our uteri with Nana, who had died and was interred in the Catholic cemetery just outside of Tākeka. Tākea, which you know well, I think.
You
know the cemetery I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And
the one outside of town.
I will visit it specially now. And remember,
yes.
your limp
my uterus.
your limp and apologetic uterus, as you describe it.
Yeah.
It's quite a radical decision to just have your uterus out. Could you not have tests on a regular... I mean, you can have your uterus out if you want to, Emma, whatever, but the alternative is to have regular tests for the cancer.
Yeah. So I think, there were up to a certain age, and I can't remember what it is now, but basically the genetic counsellor and then the obstetrics and gynecology specialist that I talked to had said, up to about 40 to mid-40, you don't have to worry too much, but after that we'll need to be, considering a prophylactic hysterectomy. And I was just like, well, that's not that far away, timing-wise. What am I going to gain in those intervening years by not doing it? And I'll be older and presumably more stressed from working, and maybe let's just do it now. So, it does sound a little bit dramatic, but also the complications from that kind of operation, if you have, for example, take your ovaries out, is that you can go into early menopause. But because I chose to retain mine, I didn't have that. So those complications weren't a factor, whereas for other people, that's a consideration. So, it made perfect logical sense to me at the time.
And just remind me why I shouldn't bury my uterus under a fruit tree in case I have that bright idea one day.
Yes, so the formaldehyde.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, could get into could get into your avocados.
Your mother, Colleen, as you describe it, Pākehā, lesbian, left your father for a woman when you were 3, activist, larger than life figure. She gets less space in this book than your father, Martian. Why?
Oh, that's an interesting observation, because I think she gets more space.
Well, the space she gets is you were a cross teenager, you didn't give her much credit, but you loved your father and used to like spending time with him a great deal more as a child.
Yeah. I guess Mum and I don't have as much conflict, so there wasn't a single issue to work out with her. But she's present across, she's the book's dedicated to her and Kobe, and she's present in every chapter, and she is really the constant in my life. So I guess Dad, there were just some specific things to reconcile, and the main piece that I wrote about him and our relationship, just those things that you kind of have to figure out as you get older, and then you have your own child and you look at the way they're interacting with the world and the people and family around them, and that's kind of the stimulus for all of this is Nico, because you're thinking I have to make sense of the world to explain it to her.
And do you think this book will explain it to her?
Probably not, because she's got no interest in anything that either I or her father does. She doesn't want to be a journalist or a doctor.
What does she want to be?
I think the last time I checked, she wanted to be a TikTok star, which I hope to dissuade her from.
Yeah, well.
But, that kind of benign disinterest as a parent worked for me. My mum and dad were just sort of like, as long as you're happy. So maybe I'll just take that approach with her and hope for the best.
That's all we can do.
That is all we can do.
Lots of very nice texts coming in, full of admiration and love for you. Emma Espiner, lovely to talk to you. Ngā mihi.
Oh, thank you, Kim.
Dr. Emma Espiner. Her memoir is called There's a Cure for This.